Hello, this is Dan from Stability, and this is day 4 of my series on planning. And today I'm going to talk about how you can take a set of OKRs and turn it into roadmaps. I'll talk a little bit as well about the difference between a classic timeline and what we do at Stability, which is more like a now, next, later roadmap, which we find we like this model better because it helps us be more agile. So let me just start the keynote and then we'll get to that at some point. So before jumping into the OKRs and talking about how you can come up with your projects, I wanted to summarize what we've seen before. So in step 1, we talked about creating a big plan, and that is a way for you to shape your company in terms of numbers, right? So we looked at how big your company should be, how many customers you'll have in 10 years, when we brought that view forward to understand what the company needs to be in 3 years and how the company will look like at the end of the next 12 months. And that plan is very much focused on KPIs, right? So the goal of a big plan is to give you a sense of scales and create really interesting discussions with your team. Then we took that big plan and we turned that into a 1-year plan, which is taking those KPIs and understanding what do we need to focus on, what's the strategy for the year to come. Right, and this idea, like the 1-year plan, is more about themes and focus. Then we took that 1-year plan and created a set of OKRs, and that's to get to that 1-year plan. What are the outcomes that we need to aim for in that Q1, and we use the OKR model to express those. And so what we're going to see today is like how you can take that set of OKRs, so that set of outcomes, and then figure out the best projects to help you get there. And so as you can see on the right side, so we went from KPIs to themes, went from themes to deciding what outcomes we want to get like in the next quarter, and then from outcomes we're going to decide what are the best activities we can do as a team to get there. So on the activities bit, like often you'll see the people talking about outcomes versus outputs. So outputs and activities, you can use the terms the same way. I prefer activities because sometimes there are things that you do that don't necessarily, if you, some of the things you do, you want to work on culture, or you have like some work that the team does that doesn't lead to a typical deliverable. I want to make sure that we think of it as an activity as well, as opposed to an outcome. Okay, so this is a set of OKRs we defined in the previous video. I'll just go quickly for it. So our company, the company we're talking about, it's a small startup that does NPS as a service, and they're just getting started. They went through their exercise and they want to kickstart Q1. And this is a set of OKRs that they came up with. So one objective is for them is to accelerate the aha moments. Another one to go vertical on NPS. And they also want to become a thought leader on customer feedback. So I'm not going to do the entire plan. I'm just going to focus on just 2 of the key results here because they're interesting to work with. So the first one is to get 150 email surveys delivered by the end of a quarter. And the second one is to increase for each customer the amount of feedback that they get every month, right? So they want to increase that frequency from 6 surveys per month to 18 surveys per month. The reason why I picked those two key results is because they actually span across multiple teams, and so it's interesting to see how you can have like different types of projects, different type of projects for a single key result. So here, another thing to talk about, like I'll jump to this thing and explain this slide a bit. So you take that key results, 150 emails, survey that have been sent. And one thing that I talked about in the previous video is that you really want your key result as much as possible to not be projects, to not be binary, to not be like, build the email support email surveys. Because if we, this here, add support for email service, that's one of the projects that the product team will have to do to be able to enable that capability. But if you if the key result, instead of being like a number of email surveys being done, being actually collected sent by customers, if instead of having this, we put ad supports for email service, then that key result becomes something that is only interesting for the product team. Whereas now that we talked about, gave a sense of quantities and we're talking about customers using the product, now the marketing team can join the party and then say, you know what, to achieve that key result, the way we're going to help is by launching a campaign for that product. So obviously, it starts by building the new capability. Then we might have to build some integrations that can help customers use that thing in an easier way. But at the end of the day, building a feature is not enough. You also need to promote it. You need to put it in front of people. You need to make sure that people, your customers know that it exists so that they can use it. The other example that I have here, the triple feedback frequency from 6 surveys per month to 18 surveys, it's a bit the same, right? So you'll have some projects such as for instance, you can improve the default settings when people use a product so that you repeat surveys multiple times during a quarter or every 90 days, we ask a question again to people. You can promote best practice in product, and those things are owned by the product team. But other teams like the marketing team and the customer success team, they can look at this key result and ask themselves, how can we help here? And so in this case, in this startup, the marketing said, hey, you know what? How about we bring bigger customers? Because if they have their bigger customers, they probably have more users. And so if they use our product, they will probably collect more feedback. And so on average, we're going to raise that number. So this is their way to contribute to this. And for the customer success team, they can think about if they see customers that are only using NPS for one product and one sub-team, how can we work with those customers to help them collect more feedback and to be more successful across the company? All right, so this is it's pretty simple, right? It's and the reason why it's not that hard to come up with those projects and to obviously you'll have to do a workshop with your team and throw some ideas there, but the reason why it's going to be easier for you to do this is because we went back here, you went through that exercise. So by the time you're thinking about projects, there's a whole context that has been set, and people are aligned. They understand, what is the company? What are we trying to become as a company? What are we going to focus on? What are the things that we need to improve on this year? And then you have a set of outcomes which is clearly defined. And when you have all of that together, then for people to decide activities, it actually facilitates that brainstorming exercise because ideas are not thrown on the wall in vacuum. They exist with a very solid, within a solid, solid boundaries. And so people can focus on the boundaries and what can be done inside of these limits. So now to talk about, I want to talk about timelines versus roadmap. So when I started in product management, and that was many years ago, a lot of the time, most companies would be using timelines. And it makes a lot of sense, right? And in timeline, basically what you do is that you take your different projects and then you try to, through the year, many quarters, you try to line them up and get a sense of dependencies and make sure that you don't stack, you have too many things in flight at the same moment. So this is very convenient when you can do it well. And I think that there's definitely a certain size company after which you kind of need to get a view which is that helps you predict your budgets in a better way. But when you're a smaller company, and by small, I think that for me, it's I'm talking about, I think once you go past, many thousands of people, maybe you need something a bit more structured. But before that, I think that it's going to actually be detrimental for you to work with a timeline. It's really expensive for people to try to evaluate evaluate the cost of the duration of project, how long the project is going to be in advance, right? So if you try to build some kind of timeline for the next 6 months or 12 months, estimating projects that are in 6 months is super complex and it's not going to be very accurate. So the other part is like those timelines are really also expensive to maintain, because as you're going to work on projects, you're going to find the unknown unknowns, and you're going to find new set of complexity, and so you'll have to adjust. What's going to happen literally that you're going to see a square like this, work on that, and then you're going to have to push it back and then push everything back. And so you're just playing Tetris and you're just playing Legos over time. So what we do at Ability, and one thing, and this is something that I recommend for most companies until it breaks, is to adopt really a now, next, later type of roadmap. And this is about saying, it's a simple way to explain to people, this is what we're doing now, this is what the teams are working on now, this is what we're planning next, the next bit of value we want to ship, and then in the future, it's more loosely defined. Those are some set of activities, projects, or things that we're thinking about that can also help us move the needle. And so in this case, you take those projects that we had and then you start to place it in the roadmap, right? So we're going to start by adding support for email surveys, improve the default settings, and then the marketing team is going to focus on those bigger customer leads. Launching the campaign for email product is going to come later when everything for the email surveys is done. So, so I don't need to really get into the details of all of that, but just know that this type of format for your roadmap is going to help you be more agile. And that's because rather than trying to commit to deadlines, you're committing more to outcomes, right? So you're working on this now because you're expecting it to produce some results. And so this slide will help explain more what I'm trying to say here. But in a task-focused company, and this is how you start when you're launching a new product, launching a new project. You start by doing a bunch of activities and you see what happens. And so we started like that in building our own company. It's like you don't really know exactly, you're not sure yet what you need to build or who your customers are going to become. So basically you do some research, you do some interviews, and then you see what comes out of it. That's okay to start like that. Like that's actually, it's hard to start the other way. Then when you get, your team gets mature enough or when you have enough knowledge about your market, your customers, your product, then you can switch to that outcome-driven mode, right? So, and this is exactly what we've been doing, where we start by, outcomes. So what is the North Star we want to get to, and what are the things that the outcomes we want to have this quarter? And based on that, we're going to set some activities, which end up being this roadmap. But what the model really becomes interesting when instead of being like a directional thing from outcomes to activities, it becomes more interesting when you have like a healthy feedback loop on the results that you want to have, right? So I want to get people to use these email surveys and I'm expecting it to increase retention, for instance. You give yourself a set of outcomes and then you do something and then you observe the results to change perhaps the outcome that you want or adjust your roadmap as you work. And this is something I'll talk about a bit more in the next video, which is how do we work, and basically set on a weekly cadence where every week we start by looking at the outcomes that we want, looking at how much progress we've made. And then based on that, we're going to look at a roadmap to understand if we need to adjust the roadmap or not. And sometimes, we're going to do something and realize that it's not really helping us to get those outcomes. And so perhaps we need to focus on something else. So that's it for today. As usual, my contact is here. So don't hesitate if you have any question, and you can reach out to me on Twitter at @StanPeter as well. Thank you.